One of the coolest things that Shakespeare and his friends ever did was they banded together in the dead of night to not only dismantle an entire physical theater building, but they moved it across a completely frozen Thames River before reconstructing it again on the other side. This is the short version of the origin story for the Globe Theater. When they moved this giant building, were they actually taking what was rightfully theirs, or did they steal it? Let's find out right now on That Shakespeare Life. If you've been studying Shakespeare, you've probably heard of this building. It comes right after hearing about Shakespeare's birthplace, and honestly, sometimes you hear about it before. It's called the Globe Theater. It's the wooden O that's mentioned in Shakespeare's plays, and it has the catchphrase attached to it of all the world's a stage. It's the place known as Shakespeare's Theater, where many of his most famous works were first introduced to the world. This building is undoubtedly famous, but its legacy was far from assumed in the 16th century when a young and ambitious William Shakespeare was working alongside a family known as the Burbages, who were equally as ambitious and neck deep in the theater industry in London at this time. We'll cover the history of the Burbages and Shakespeare and their entrepreneurial innovation sort of endeavors there in a different episode. But to get started in their professional career, to launch everything that would come after, they had to have a theater, which is where they had kind of a rough start. They ended up in a dispute with their landlord over the building known as the theater, where the Burbages first began their theater endeavors. Now, what they chose to do as a result of this conflict is really the stuff of legend. They completely dismantled, like took it apart piece by piece by piece. This is a huge timber structure, remember? Okay, this wasn't easy to put together. It definitely wasn't hard. I mean, it definitely was hugely hard to take apart. It wasn't a small feat. And they were working together, presumably with some hired or perhaps just really enthusiastic friends that maybe didn't have anything else to do in the dead of winter. Who knows how they talked these people into doing this? Because it had to have been more than just Shakespeare, Richard, and Cuthbert Burbage. They had to have other people. So presumably they roped in some other folks, but they took it all apart and they moved it across the frozen river before reconstructing it in Southwark, where they owned or at least had autonomy over the place where they put this theater then and built it, where we think of the Globe belonging, right? Now, the question in my mind about this whole affair is whether or not Shakespeare and the Burbages actually owned the building in the first place. I had always assumed that they did. This is why they could take it apart and move it. But I don't really know. Had they bought the building? Were they absconding with someone else's property? Who owned these pieces? To find out the answer and the context behind this event, I spoke with historian and author Richard Dutton. Richard Dutton is a distinguished Shakespeare scholar whose decades of teaching and research have focused on Shakespeare, Renaissance drama, theatrical censorship, authorship, and performance at the courts of both Elizabeth I and James I. He's published and edited numerous major works, some of which include William Shakespeare, A Literary Life, Shakespeare, Court Dramatist, and the four-volume Companions to the Works of Shakespeare. He knows a lot about Shakespeare and his history. And I sat down for a podcast conversation that spanned several details about Shakespeare's theaters with Dr. Dutton. And when it came to the backstory on how the Globe was moved and whether Shakespeare was a thief, here's what he had to say.
Oh, well, it was rather critical. The way I've just run off that list makes it sound as though there were a lot. But in practice, there were only ever about 4 or 5 of those amphitheaters like the Globe available to actors at any one time. And if you were going to be performing continuously in London, you had to have control over one of those. That's a new thing that opens up in the 1590s. Prior to that, all performers toured, but London becomes a viable context in which you can be performing year round. A company called Strange's Men tried out in the early 1590s. Shakespeare's company is one of the first to make that work. And the problem that they met in 1597 was that their landlord, the man who owned the land on which the theatre was based, refused to renew their lease. This put them in a critical position They were able to use a neighboring theatre called the Curtain for a time, but this was old and not really very satisfactory. Um, Also, technically, the man who owned the lease um, actually technically owned the theatre itself once it was left beyond the end of the term of the lease. That's why it had to be done as dramatically as it was. Basically speaking, the Burbage brothers, who really owned the theatre, was actually technically Cuthbert Burbage, the elder brother, but they always worked together, who owned it. They saw their entire investment, as it were, in danger of going down the tubes.
So they
So
were saving it
basically,
on a technicality. They were getting in under the wire of the owner.
they were stealing what had been their property. The leaseholder took them to court afterwards, but never got anywhere with it. But of course, those particularly the big oak beams which form the inner structure of the theatre were phenomenally expensive kinds of things to have. And so it was worth their while to pull them all down and ship them out across the River Thames and to rebuild them in this site in Southwark.
Well, based on that feedback, I think that rightfully Shakespeare and the Burbages could have been brought up on charges of burglary for absconding with the theater in the dead of night. Who gets to say that they did that? I stole a theater in the middle of the night. Oh my gosh. I wonder why the owner didn't try to chase them down. Why is there no record of Shakespeare and the Burbages being brought up on burglary charges or being charged with theft maybe did the owner just hate them that much that he's like, please be gone, get out of here. I don't know. Like, why was there no follow-up to this? They stole it and rebuilt it, and then they built this huge legacy. I don't know. There's so many more questions to explore, as there often is in Shakespeare history. There's always more great questions to chase down. If you'd like to hear more great questions about theater and Shakespeare and our entire conversation with Richard Dutton on Shakespeare's theater, plural, theaters, because we talk about more than just the globe in our conversation, you can listen to this episode as part of the back catalog for That Shakespeare Life. We have over 150 episodes so right now we're up to episode 437, I think is where we're at right now. So we have over 400 shows. 150 of our original episodes got put into the back catalog for supporters of our show. So you can join us at CassidyCash.com/episode 16 and sign up to be a supporter of the show to listen to this entire episode, as well as it's over 150 shows at this point in our back catalog, and you can listen to all of them when you support us on that page. So again, the URL is CassidyCash.com/episode 16. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
If you like walking around in turn of the 17th century England to see the sights, smell the smells, play the games, and maybe even haunt an old theater or two, then this is the place for you. Hit that notification bell so you can be sure to join us on our next adventure. I'll see you in the next episode.